Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the Indian Dream podcast. Welcome to our second episode on the Trend Report on Audience First Products. We're really excited to have Amit Varma with us in this episode. Amit is one of India's most popular podcasters, and back in the day, he was also one of India's most prolific bloggers. From 2004 to 2007, his blog, India Uncut, used to get about 10,000 visits a day. And right now, his podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, gets more than 150,000 downloads a month. But keep in mind that each episode is about 2 to 3 hours long. Today's conversation was a journey. We begin in the early 2000s in the days of blogging and end up exploring the various forms of content creation that we have available today, from podcasting to newsletters and more. Amit has many insights into the art of being a creator online and what it takes to build such large audiences. At the core, he believes that you need to have a passion for what you're doing because content creation is a labor of love and that takes time to build and grow one's reach. We also speak about the ways that Amit has finally been able to monetize his large internet following after more than 15 years of being an online creator. He built a writing course that has been wildly successful and plans to add a few more courses. The end of the conversation was quite unexpected. Amit was an entrepreneur during the late 90s when he went to New York to pitch the idea of iTunes before iTunes even existed. And then he built a quizzing website, which was in the top three of India's most trafficked websites for a while. As usual, if you have any questions or just want to connect, please feel free to join our WhatsApp group. The link is in the show notes. For all of our listeners, today we are really happy to have Amit Varma here. For those people who don't know Amit Varma, he's probably one of India's most popular podcasters. He's the host of the Seen and the Unseen podcast, which is one of India's most popular podcasts. And we're really happy to have you here today. And yeah, thanks for coming, Amit.
Sahil and Siddharth, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, so I mixed up your blog and your podcast, but yeah, you've been running the India Uncut blog for a long time, and between 2004 and 2008, that was one of the most popular blogs in India. And now your podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, which gets what 150,000 downloads per month, which is quite incredible for us who are quite new to the entire podcast game. Over the years, two times, with your blog and your podcast, you've built such cult followings. Do you have a way that you've been building these followings? Apart from just investing in your time and effort into quality of content, is there something else that you know to build these large followings?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't want to build a post facto narrative and say this was all part of a grand plan and all of that. Though, one can, in hindsight, attach a sort of a plan and a rationale to all of it. I think what really happened with blogging was, look, I was a journalist. I was, one of the editors at Click Info, and I was just getting bored of writing about that all the time. So I started blogging, and as you said, between 2004 and 2008, I would just do 5 posts a day, and that came to more than 8,000 posts. And what happens after a while is that initially you do it because, hey, there's no stress, you can write whatever you want, and the blog just frees you up in terms in various ways, which if you want I can elaborate upon. But it was so different and so refreshing for a content creator to have a blog. But once I built a following, then that becomes a commitment device. They keep expecting more content from you and you keep building. Now in those days I wasn't thinking consciously that, okay, this is how I will build my audience, this is how I will build my brand, this is how I will monetize. In fact, I never actually monetized India Uncut itself, but the brand building that happened because of that got me a lot of other work in terms of writing columns and even writing for the Wall Street Journal, which came about because partly because they read what was on my blog. So I was so that's kind of how it happened. It was a happy serendipitous accident that it became popular. But in those days, honestly, besides nebulous benefits that you get from whatever brand building you have done, getting you other work, there was really no way to monetize that. And at one point, in fact, in around 2009 and then 2010 properly, I sort of moved off blogs, and I became a professional poker player for 5 years, which was all consuming and took all my time. And that was quite a ride, and rewarding in different ways. And then when I came back, I found that sort of, a few oldies remembered ki ha, India Uncut and Amit Varma, but otherwise the brand was no longer what it was. I had completely missed the Twitter wave, and I had to almost, in a sense, start from scratch. And whatever numbers you might talk about today, when the seen and the unseen started, the numbers were negligible. It was nothing. uh, and but then the thing is that, again, it's the same lesson of the blog, that you build a value consistently. You deliver engaging content consistently, and people will come. And once again, I'm a bit of a fool in this regard, that I've never really cared about building an audience per se. I have a bunch of post facto insights about that, and I realize I did some things right and some things wrong. But that wasn't why I was blogging or why I was podcasting. I was doing it because I wanted to do it. After a while, it became a labor of love, and I fancy I would have done it anyway, even if there was no money in it. In fact, in blogging, there never was per se.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you're building value consistently, but how did you know that you were building value consistently? Because especially with the blog at that time, there was no social media, there was not much you could do in terms of engaging with your readers directly. How did you know that, like, hey, what I'm doing right now is building value consistently, and these people are enjoying what I'm writing? Was there some way that you were engaging with your readers directly?
Well, there are sort of two ways. One is, of course, you see the page views on your website. Like right at the end, at my peak, I think India Uncut got about 20,000 page views a day. So you can see the engagement. And obviously, there were spurts in between. Like when I was live blogging the tsunami, I got like 1 million page views in a week, and I didn't even know it because I was actually on the road during that time, traveling through Tamil Nadu. So one, there are, of course, the page views, and you can tell. Two, people would write to you in those days. Now they don't. Now they'll do a tweet or a retweet, or they'll send you a message. But people would actually write to you. They would engage with you, and one got a very good sense of one's audience. Now the irony is, and this is, one fundamental way in which the landscape has completely shifted between the blogging age and the podcasting age, so to say, is that back in the day I had an audience. And the thing is, I know the audience values me because they're spending time reading my work, they're responding to it. Time is money, right? So if you spend like 10 minutes reading someone, that's 10 minutes of your time and the money that it is worth. But the creator at that time had no way of capturing that value. You had to either hope that you get advertising, for which the long tail didn't really work. For it to be meaningful, you needed a certain amount of volume. Or if you didn't get advertising, you had to go through some platform. You have to hope that you build your brand, and then a Wall Street Journal or a Guardian will ask you to write for them. Mint gave me a column after I started blogging because they liked what they saw, and that led to further journalism awards. So all of it came indirectly from the blogging, but I was dependent on platforms. There was no direct interface between me and my audience, where they can show their appreciation directly. I was dependent on platforms. That was very inefficient. Only a small chunk of the value actually kind of came down to me, which is why it I described that classically as a labor of love. And all that has changed dramatically, especially in the last couple of years, which is why your podcast, in a sense, is well timed. That it's just changed dramatically for creators, where we no longer, like, advertising is basically dead. People haven't woken up to that. It is dead. It is dead forever. And platforms haven't figured it out. I think in India, in the mainstream journalism space, and I've been a journalist and an editor for donkey's years as well, so I can speak to that. In mainstream journalism, people have not figured out that the way we consume content and discover content has completely transformed itself. There are no more, in that sense, a lot of it is social media mediated. A lot of it is not going to a destination website and looking at things. It is just following random links on social media. Even how much we read, and the sort of things that we do, make old ways of thinking about media utterly irrelevant. Make strategies of the past irrelevant, and mainstream journalism and platforms haven't figured it out. And at some point, there will be new kind of platforms emerging, which will hopefully get this sort of new reality. But the fundamental shift, again, is that now there are ways for creators to have that direct connect with their audience and capture some of the value that is placed on their work by the people at large out there.
Yeah. So, Amit, as you rightly pointed out, 2004, when you started the India Uncut blog, you ran it for 6 7 years, and you had no control or no engagement with your audience. It was sort of platform dependent, that you put up a website and people were reading onto it. When you came back into the game after your poker stint, when you came back into the game, did you could you foresee that this was different this time around, where you're going to actively build an audience, where you're going to be directly engaging with them, be it the podcast, be it Twitter, be it any other medium? Was there a conscious thought? Because I'm also assuming that you lost all the audience that you had built for India Uncut, apart from the brand name that you had created as Amit Varma.
Yeah, good question. I think, like, first of all, India Uncut still exists, but the website exists as a repository for my published content. And I've just recently started a newsletter called the India Uncut newsletter, and I can elaborate on my reasons for why I chose to do a newsletter rather than revive the blog. But to be very honest, number one, there was a lot of engagement. Only it wasn't in the sense that we understand it today, in terms of Twitter. That today, if you're on Twitter and you read something by me and you want to communicate that, you can just press a like button, or you can retweet, or you can drop me a note, and it's very little effort. Obviously, sending an email to someone about something you read on the blog is a little more effort. In fact, you had to disable my comment section, like pretty much all the big blogs of the time did, because there would just be too much, and the noise to signal ratio would go out of whack. So there was plenty of engagement, number one, and that engagement is kind of what kept it going, because I always had the sense that there is an audience. People would not respond to my newspaper columns or whatever, no matter where it appears, but they would respond to my blog post. The other thing is that, look, by 2009, I not only was my interest in blogging waning, but I think coincidentally around the same time, the age of blogging, as it were, was coming to an end. That social media really killed blogging, in the sense that all the different functions of blogging were disaggregated by your social media platforms. So your micro blogging and your filter blogging, moved on to Twitter. Your personal posts and essays and so on moved on to either Facebook or Instagram, and all of that. All of it was disaggregated, moved on to different places. And honestly, there's only one blog I still read regularly, which is Marginal Revolution, because that's such a great site. But otherwise, I don't read blogs anymore. And so I think that game was already over, even if I hadn't got back to poker. And obviously, when I came back, there was a different kind of engagement, but I'd missed the whole Twitter thing. So, when I come back circa 2016 or so, people don't know me anymore, which is completely fine. There's a new wave of social media stars because of Twitter and all of which I missed. And the discourse is far more shallow. It is now responding to headlines. It is responding to the imperatives of tribalism, where what you see online is that the discourse is very polarized. People have at least a lot of vocal people have formed their own tribal echo chambers, and they spend most of their time either mocking the other side, or virtue signaling to raise their status within their own side. So the whole discourse has been terribly degraded. But I remain convinced, and that's something that my podcast demonstrated to me, that the silent majority does want sensible content, that it is not all screaming and shouting and abusing and polarized discourse. There is a space for nuance, but you won't find that space on Twitter because of the other incentives at play, where you have to play to the tribalism that exists. But there is a space for nuance, and I think the audience for the seen and the unseen obviously demonstrates that. Now, the point is, none of this was my primary activity. Blogging did not get me my income when I was blogging. I was doing other things. Similarly, when I came back out of poker, I was editing this online magazine called Pragati. I still write a column for the Times of India. So the seen and the unseen was not my income either. It is now, in direct and indirect ways, but it wasn't then. So I could just do it in terms of, hey, this is something I love doing, and I wasn't stressed about how do I build my audience. I wasn't sitting down and strategizing about that. I have always had the perhaps idealistic view that, look, if you produce good work, it will find its way in the world and find its audience. I don't try to stress about that too much.
You mentioned how, like, during the age of the blogs, there was not really any way to monetize, and then you've come back now during the age of post your poker streak, and you got into the Twitter and with your podcast, etc., etc. You've built your audience. You didn't really think about it too much, but you have built a pretty significant audience. At what point did you actively start thinking that, like, okay, I've built this significant audience and I need to start thinking about ways to monetize it? The seen and the unseen was not your source of income, but now, as you mentioned, it has become a source of income indirectly and directly. What was that turning point for you? What was the thought process that got you to that place that, hey, like, I need to start thinking about this?
The turning point is relatively recent. In fact, I would even say that I actually came to a full understanding of what's happening this year. And that's partly because the changes also are very recent, where the landscape for creators changed. So when, like I said, I started the seen and the unseen as, okay, here's an interesting experiment. Let's kind of see how it goes. And at that time, again, I wasn't the catalyst for it. I was doing it in partnership with the guys at IVM Podcast at the time. They are no longer my partners, and I've been producing the show myself for a year. But they were my partners at the time, and Amit Doshi, who runs IVM, approached me and kind of convinced me, why don't you do something? And I said, "Okay, it's an experiment. Let's do it." And I did it, and then it took a life of its own. And all of this time, I assumed that this is going to be a bit like blogging. I'm going to do work that people will appreciate, but it is not going to make me any money. But I don't give a shit because I love doing it. So I'm just going to kind of focus on what I enjoy doing and not stress about the incomes so much, because the income will come from elsewhere. Now, what happened this year was that and during that time, my deal with IVM was that they'll get the they'll do the ad sales, get the advertising money in. We split it half, all of that. Very little of that happened. There was really hardly anything coming in. The first 108 episodes, in fact, I did for free. Then a little bit started to come in, but it was a trickle, and not enough to cover my time. And after breaking with IVM last year, over the last year, obviously, I'm now sort of a one man army. I produce it myself. I have an editor on contract and so on. So I never had the time to look for ad sales. So I had kind of given up on it. I thought iska kuch nahi hoga. Then what sort of happened was that at the start of April, I decided that, okay, let's try the voluntary payment method, where I just ask people that if they want to contribute to keeping the show alive, they can. And I didn't expect it to work very well. I was kind of blown away by the response. So now, suffice it to say that there was an initial surge of goodwill, which was extremely gratifying, and also, and after that, it is steady enough that the show is independent. I'm not out of pocket in doing the show. I can keep myself going, and I can even just about sustain myself in Bombay on what I get in from that. I realized, so there were two important things that happened there. One thing that I realized from that is that I had no idea how vast my audience is. And again, you mentioned podcast numbers. At that time, I was getting, I think, more than 150,000 downloads a month. Now it's a bit more. But the average engagement time of each episode was about 40 minutes, and people would listen to it in multiple sessions. So that doesn't mean people stop listening at 40, but that was your average session, which is off the charts. It is insane. And also, as you know, my episodes are between 2 to 3 hours, which gives a lie to the common belief that people have short attention spans and all of that, which even I used to share that common belief. So number one, people crave deep content. Number two, um, their engagement with it is so much deeper than their engagement with any other form of content. I mean, I would honestly say that if an episode is downloaded 100,000 times, that is equivalent to 20 or 30 million views on YouTube. Because what you're really doing on YouTube is you're just going, your average engagement time could be 8 seconds, 10 seconds. People will just go there, lose interest, go off. That does cater to the short attention span. Podcast, the engagement level is different. And I realized this. I remember when one of my listeners who was contributing a fairly generous amount every month, and I wrote to him and I said, look, thanks for this, but I do not even know you. We have never met, we have never interacted. Why are you doing this? And he said that, I spend 3 hours every week with your voice in my head. That's more than I listen to my spouse. You don't know what it means to me. So that was one way in which it changed, that I got a sense of the audience which I hadn't had before. It was a number to me before, and suddenly there were all of these real people who cared about these ideas I was discussing, who felt they had a stake in it, who felt involved enough to actually contribute monetarily. The other thing that happened was, of course, that I started this online writing course, the art of clear writing. And again, people signed up in droves. And initially, people signed up because they trusted the brand that I had built for myself with the seen and the unseen. They said, we listen to his podcast every week. This is a serious guy. We can trust this guy. And after that, it has sustained itself and continued growing because of word of mouth. Because once again, what I care about is, all these things like marketing, building an audience, and all that are secondary for me. I just want to do a good job, build a good product, and I think that takes care of itself. And with the writing course, I'm seeing that while the initial surge was because of people who are interested in writing and who say that, okay, we can trust this guy, after that there is also a lot of word of mouth kicking in from people who have done the course. Now, what is my broad realization here? And this is a big lesson for creators. And and it's so big for me that for people who haven't figured it out yet, I feel the need to share it, which is that, number one, creators no longer need to depend on advertisers or platforms to make their income. They can build a direct interface with whatever their audience is. Number two, the way that creators should think about what they are doing is that they should they should realize that all of their work can have a positive impact on themselves in two ways. One is reach and one is revenue. So there might be some work that you do for reach and you don't really care about making money for it, and the other is that you cash in on the brand that you build of that, and then you sort of make revenue for it. For example, in the digital music age, people will talk about how, earlier, once upon a time, musicians would make money from the sales of albums, but now the albums are for reach and they make money from going on live tours, which, I don't know how true that is, but that was at one time thought to be the paradigm. But that's certainly, I think, how creators should think of it, that you should be clear about everything that you do, that and if you love something, you should do it, period. And if it is good, it is there for reach. It will get you reach. Good work will always find its audience. That's what I believe, and I've started from zero two separate times and done it. So I will continue believing that. I think one has to be clear whenever one is doing something, that, what am I doing for reach, what am I doing for revenue. And one also has to, as a creator, as a young creator, you should have the humility to recognize that the revenue won't kick in from day one. You are not entitled to revenue or entitled to people paying money to read you or listen to you or whatever the case may be. You need to build the reach first. The reach has to come first, and then as the reach kicks in, you'll be surprised by the revenue. There is that old saw about forecasting the future, about science fiction writers, that when they look into the future, they overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And I think that is true of creators, that creators will often overestimate the short term, and they will think that, oh, I will make so much money, and then they make nothing at all, and it's like, what the hell. But if you just stick with it, stick with it, the long term will pay off more than you think. And obviously, this is also the availability heuristic, because my own story is the one that is available to me, so I'm drawing the lessons from that. But I think by and large, this should hold true for creators.
Amit, I think in your story, there's the way you define the reach versus revenue. I think in your story, it's pretty clear that you waited a long time and you waited two stints technically to before you said, "Hey, I'm going to see how I can make revenue out of this." Right? But a lot of new creators who are doing this full time or trying to figure out something in this space full time have that question on at what point should I think about revenue, because if I don't think about revenue, I don't really know if what I'm creating is of any value in terms of commerce sense, is of value to my consumer. What if I put a paywall and they're just not going to consume it, right? So how does a new creator sort of balance that dilemma?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, the thing is, I'll stress that none of this was planned. So the two stints I put in, I wasn't thinking of it in either of those times that, oh, I am building my reach now, I will make revenue later. That's not how I thought of it. I made my living doing something else, and I thought, okay, this is something that I love doing and I enjoy doing it, and I'm going to do it for its own sake. And that was pretty much my approach. I mean, I remember at one point of the scene and the unseen, I was feeling really low. I was like, that shit, I'm putting in so much, such an incredible amount of hard work, and there's nothing coming in, and it's all a waste. And I was going to a recording that day, and I was just feeling really low about the whole thing, and the recording was so great. And this was episode 150 with VK Karthika, where we spoke about books, so maybe that's a reason. And the recording was so great that at the end of it I thought that shit, it's worth it. It's worth it for its own sake. I don't care if I don't make money. So I would say for creators that if you find something you love, then you should do that. You should, and I know it's easier said than done because we all do need to make a living. But the bottom line is that if you don't love what you're doing, if you take like a marketing approach to it, that okay, where is there a hole in the market, and what does the audience there want to listen to, and let me cater some content for that, you will fail. Okay, period. You have to inherently have a passion for what you're doing. If that happens to fall into a slot where people need content and it takes off, that's great, that's lucky. But the other thing I would say is that, look, I think all creators who make it big, and I'm looking at newsletters also, and we can talk about that, but all the creators I see who've done very well, there are people who are passionate about what they do. They're passionate about it, they have the knowledge, they would probably do it anyway, right? And then they actually get down to doing it, and that passion, that expertise, the hard work that they've put in then shows, and that is where the value comes from. So if you're a creator, for the first question to ask yourself is, why are you creating? And the cart can't drive the horse. You can't say that I'm creating because I want to make money. I think you will only make money if you say that I'm creating because I want to do this, I'm creating something of value, and I will and the money will happen. And I think that has to come first, because if you go in there with the passion for what you're creating, then you'll create something good. And I believe something good will always find its way in the world. What I would add to that is a caveat, is that it is not a one off thing, that I write a great article today or I do one season of a podcast. It is not a one off thing. You have to keep doing it, and continuously doing it does two things. One, because you are doing it all the time, you become better at it. I don't listen to the early episodes of The Seen and the Unseen because I don't like it at all. But it was much shorter and it took a different approach. But over time, as it became a long form podcast, I really discovered my groove, and and it was amazing. And so similarly, so that's reason number one why you have to keep doing something regularly over a period of time, because initially you may not be so good when you start out, but by doing a lot of it you'll get better. And secondly, doing it regularly over a period of time with a fixed periodicity will maximize your chances of getting that reach. I might read a great article by a random name today and not look for that random name again. But if I am reading something great by random name every 3 days or every week or whatever, then I will say, huh, this is a guy I must follow, and then I might go and subscribe to his newsletter, and then I might buy his merchandise or whatever. So it takes a long time to sort of build this relationship with your audience. So if you're a creator, just ask yourself why you're creating. If it is because you love creating and you also want to make money, wanting to make money is a noble impulse. It gets a bad rap, but it is a noble impulse, because the only way to make money is by providing value to other people with your content. So it is a noble impulse, but you should want to, whatever you're creating, the passion for it has to come first, and only then will that show in the quality of the work, and only then will the audience come.
Amit, actually, I want to talk about the newsletters because you've mentioned them twice now. And so, what was the reason that you've decided to restart the India Uncut as a newsletter instead of a blog again?
So the main reason is that, look, destination websites are done, so no one really types in a URL and goes there. So back in the day, people would type in indiauncut.com and go to the blog when my blog was active. In fact, people would write, NRIs from all over the world would write to me saying that, we don't trust the Indian newspapers. This is how we get our daily dope about India. We type in indiauncut.com on our browser every morning, and we take the news from there. And we get our dough from there. And of course, in those days, I was blogging anywhere between 5 to 20 times a day, so I was extremely prolific that way. But the thing is, today no one goes to destination websites. Everybody is discovering content through social media, through Twitter or Facebook, or people are sending WhatsApp links and all that. So you can't count on a destination website doing the work for you. Newsletters are a great mechanism because the content goes to the reader. It's not the reader having to come to the content. The content lands up in the reader's inbox. It plays to the tendency for inertia because the reader doesn't have to do anything. The content is just coming to her. So it works for that reason, and also because business models have opened up, where now through newsletters, so my newsletter is free, and at the moment I'm going to optimize for reach, and I'm just going to try to be regular, which I'm not right now, but I want to post 3 4 times a week eventually, and get to a certain kind of regularity before I even think about trying to monetize it. But so right now it's for reach, but a lot of people make a lot of revenue through it. On Substack, it's almost a standard that a good newsletter will cost like $100 a year, and as a subs, and will have anywhere between 1 to 10,000 subs. I mean, if you just go on Substack and you see the list of the top paid newsletters, and all of that is great. And here's another thing that I'll underscore about that Substack list, which is very impressive, that you go there and you will find that they're all domain specialists. There's a great newsletter on China by a domain specialist. Who would have thought that thousands of people will pay $100 a year for a newsletter on China? But they do, because the content is great, because it is so engaging for its own sake. So you have, I think Emily Oster writes a newsletter on parenting, for example, the economics of parenting or whatever, something of that sort. But again, very specialized, very popular. So that tells you that there is a model out there where where the long tail really does kick in. That if you get 1,000 people to pay $100 a year for your newsletter, you are making $100,000 a year. That's decent, though obviously the superstars make far more. So for that reason, I think newsletters are exciting. And why I am also excited by it is that I see the way in blogging one used to come across very unusual, exciting, deep, enriching content which one would not find on mainstream media, because mainstream media was mostly generalists, and there was a limit to how deep they would go on a subject, whereas blogging gave you specialists writing from a specialized viewpoint and bringing their lens to it. And so it was incredible, and newsletters is that turbocharged. So just as a reader and a discoverer of content, I'm quite excited about what's going to happen. Because, and also because it is an illustration of how the creator can not have to depend on advertising and platforms, and actually go directly to the consumer and capture some of the value that the consumer actually places on their work, which feels so heartwarming and rewarding.
And Substack just, I think, about a month or two ago, started allowing Indian newsletters to also start monetizing. So this is something that even Indian newsletter writers can start doing. So, Amit, over the last 15 years, you've built a significant reach, like you mentioned, and you've started asking for those small token gifts during your podcast, and you've also started your writing course. Do you also have plans to monetize your writing and your reach in a different way, or are you happy with the course that you're doing? And what are the lessons also that you've learned while doing the course over the last 6 months?
To be honest, I never really thought of all this stuff in terms of monetizing. It was that, I like blogging, I like doing the podcast, so I'm going to do it. How the course came to mind was that, okay, April, everybody was in lockdown and everybody's at home. And I used to teach a course on how to write an op ed for the Takshashila Institution in Bangalore. They have a postgraduate course in public policy. I taught a module on that, on how to write an op ed. And I thought one day that, look, everybody is at home, and and I already kind of know the tools of doing this. I have taught on Zoom before and all of that, and I definitely felt I have the sort of knowledge to be able to do this. So I thought, okay, let me give it a shot. So I just put out a tweet, I think, to begin with, asking people if they would be interested. And the tweet within a few hours got a massive response, and I said, okay, let's go, because I didn't expect that massive response again. And this also tells you how a lot of your audience is silently consuming. You should not go by who is making noise on Twitter and all of that. That's irrelevant. A lot of your audience is silently consuming, and suddenly putting out that tweet brought a lot of them to life and saying, yeah, we'll do the course. And then I did it, and that's great, and it's rewarding. Now the thing is, one can think of infinite ways to monetize the reach, but just as an ethic, I don't want to do something I don't want to do anyway, just for the sake of revenue. And I think in the long run, if I do something substandard, that will that will hurt my reach as well. That will hurt my sort of credibility and brand as well. So I don't want to try too many things and do substandard things, or whatever I do, I want to do it well. Now my big thing obviously is to kind of write books. I wrote, one shitty book more than a decade ago, but I'm working on more. But again, I am doing that because I want to do that. Whether they'll make any money on or not, I don't know, and I don't care. It's something I'm doing because I want to do it. And as for now, the classes are going well, and in fact, I'm uh, at the time of speaking to you on October 4, I think I'm thinking of putting together a course on podcasting as well, because I have picked up a bunch of learnings through my journeys. So if I can construct it into something that I feel is of value, maybe I'll offer a course for that as well.
Okay, so then that means Siddharth and I have to pay for another course with you.
You guys are doing a damn good job already, so maybe you don't need it.
Thanks, Amit. I think I'm pretty much done with my questions, but I have a small question I've been curious about. You mentioned even during that the life and times of Amit Varma on Grand Tamasha that you were a failed entrepreneur back in the early 2000s, or I think around that time. What was that your first entrepreneurial stint that you tried back then?
It was very amusing. It was something that almost came together in a Jugaru way. So, a couple of things happened. One is that for some reason, I got chatting to the people at a music label then called Magna Sound over something or the other. And one of the things that I told them, and this was circa 1999, and one of the things I told them is that your business as you know it is going to collapse. Nobody is going to buy CDs or cassettes and any of that crap. All music is going to be digital. And they all sat back and they guffawed. But then they bought the idea and they said, let's start something together. And my idea was, I created this venture which would, and remember, this is years before iTunes and years before MySpace, because my idea was really a combination of the two, where I said that we will sell digital music online, so people can download these MP3s on their computers or whatever and listen to them, and they don't have to take full albums or whatever. And we figured out the pricing. I sort of got together with the head of Magna Sound at the time, and one of his senior people. So it was the three of us who started this. Me and the other guy. We went to New York in 2000. We presented in front of a bunch of venture capitalists at this event which was there, and a couple of them were really impressed. They were like, yes, you are right, this is the future, we will put money in you. And everything looked hunky dory. And right then the Nasdaq crash happened, and everything kind of fell apart. And our so we were well before our time, and we were possibly also in the wrong place, because what are you going to do from Bombay? And my partner, by the way, had actually signed up with music labels, and we had the agreements to have 70,000 songs available at about, I think, a dollar each, or 80 cents each, or whatever. I don't remember the details. So we had all that in place, but we were not in Silicon Valley, and we were probably too early for the game. So that got over. Then right after that fell apart, I got together with a couple of people, and I thought, let's do gaming, because gaming is interactive. You build sticky websites, all of that. And Kaun Banega Crorepati had just taken off in those days. So my friends and I got together and we created this gaming website, where we created a game which was pretty similar to that. And obviously, all of this no longer exists. There are no traces of it anywhere. Our game was called Crore Master, and we created a character called Babu Moshai, who would ask a bunch of questions. And I was into quizzing, so I got a database of a few thousand questions, and we built a game, and it was a very funky game. And we decided that because our audience will be in India, our servers need to be in India, because in those days it made a slight difference depending on, I think, what the where your backend was. So we got VSNL hosting. Now the deal with VSNL was that they did not make you pay according to the space you occupied on the server. They made you pay according to the traffic. And the game just took off and became viral. Like, there was 1 month where it was the number two website within India, between Rediff and Cricinfo. I forget which was one and which was three. Just 1 month where it happened. It was utterly insane, and everybody was playing it. And we were broke and bankrupt and deeply in debt because of VSNL, because they are charging us per, plus per the traffic. At which point we approached, like Star had a website in, Star TV was trying to it was still in, even though the Nasdaq crash had happened and all that, they were still in the days of the dot com boom, and they were like, okay, we will have a lot of dot com properties. So we approached their internet arm in Bangalore. We got talking to one of them, and he was like, this is incredible traffic, we have tried so many things, we don't have a hundredth of this, we'll buy you over. And 1 week later they shut down, because those were the times all the dot coms were shutting down. So I was screwed, and at that point I said that no, man, I can't do this shit anymore. I need to find a real job, and I went to Wisdom, which later bought Cricinfo, and they were kind enough. Actually, I remember I'll always be grateful to my editor at Wisdom, and now editor at Cricinfo, Sambit Bal, for this, because Sambit, heard about my situation and all of that, and I was deeply in debt at the time. And Sambit said, "Listen, I'll tell you what. The company will give you an advance. We'll cut it from your salary every month, and just come on board." And that was a massive lifeline. And from that point on, I was sort of a journalist, and I said that shit, I don't want to do this entrepreneur nonsense anymore. Who wants to see the bleeding future? Because there is just so much luck involved. You got to be in the right place. You got to be at the right time. Which is why even now, I mean, I realize that the Indian media space is broken. There is scope to do something. I have ideas for how one could make a difference, but I just feel that there is so much going on, and I'm doing well enough as a creator that I don't really want to kind of start something again.
Wow, I mean, a different place at a different time. I think we would have been interviewing you instead for your entrepreneurial insights instead of your writing.
Well, I mean, failed entrepreneur. So what do you say? But I guess even failure holds lessons.
I mean, you basically built iTunes before iTunes existed,
Yeah, but
and
the thing is, this is true of every freaking good idea. I mean, Matt Ridley has written about this in his recent book, How Innovation Works, about how the light bulb was invented some 16 times by 16 people around the same time. And the point. And I wasn't the only one to think of iTunes before iTunes. There were other people who shortly after me or around the same time, without my knowing it, were also trying similar things at the time. So the point is that these are insights that when the time comes, multiple people will get, and whoever succeeds is the right time, right place guy. So people will, for example, look at successful businesses today like an Uber or a Airbnb, and they'll say, what a groundbreaking disruptive idea. But the point is that ideas like this are actually a dime a dozen, and it's partly a question of pure luck, timing, placement, who you know, what happens when, that one business like this takes off and others don't, and all of that. So that's there is just an incredible amount of luck involved, and which is why some of the people who lead these many of these successful startups, I won't take any names, are actually not that clued in, they're not that brilliant. They just got lucky, they got on a particular bandwagon of an idea when it was becoming the zeitgeist, and their business is the one that happened to take off.
we usually end our show with one question. I'm a little bit afraid to ask you this. Is we ask our guests, what is one piece of content that could be a book, a podcast, a YouTube video, or anything else that they would recommend to the listeners of the episode? But knowing you, you're such a voracious reader, and etc. etc. And I'm really afraid that you might give about 10 or 20 books.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing that came to mind, which is again the recency bias, because we have been talking about it, is a great website, Marginal Revolution. In fact, when I want to build my reading list, I will often go to Marginal Revolution and look at Tyler Cowen's book post. Ki, okay, what books is he recommending now? Because he reads, I think I have been told by one of his associates that he reads 70 books a week. So always a good person to go to. But it's hard to say. There is so much. I ended a weekly podcast I was doing with a friend recently called Econ Central, and in the last episode, we gave a bunch of book recommendations to everybody. But one thing I will say is that sometimes some of us, and I imagine many of the people listening to this show might share this, feel that we read too much nonfiction and not enough fiction. And I feel we should correct that, because there is a lot of value and beauty in fiction as well, which expands our world by making us live other lives. And so the one specific book I will recommend is this collection of short stories by Ken Liu. The surname is spelled Liu, called Paper Menagerie. In fact, the title short story is just mind blowing. It is so incredible, and if you haven't read fiction for a while and want to sort of revive your love for it, that's a great place to start, because it's just so beautiful and captures the human condition so well and does things that nonfiction can never ever do.
I completely agree with you on this point. There was a point of time in my life where I only read nonfiction, and then I went back to fiction after that, and I realized the importance of fiction. And Paper Menagerie is a fantastic essay. You had recommended it recently on your writing group as well. So, Amit, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for your time, Amit. Thank you so much for telling us about your experience of building an audience first product. And one of the things that stood out was just the sheer love that you have for creating, where nothing that happens subsequently is really going to impact your decision of creating this, right? Which is what is very inspiring, and I think a lot of lessons for the creators, that you got to love what you're doing, because it takes a long while before you build that audience and can have some form of sort of revenue out of it. So thank you so much for doing that, and thank you so much for taking time out.
Thank you for having me on your show, and I recognize and I respect that your show is also a labor of love for you guys. So all the best with it.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks a lot.